And the next speaker is Brian Dunn. He has a degree in history and law and a long professional career relevant to that, and a sci-fi fan, and the author of the science fiction novel Tubetown Frontier, which seems to be quite well researched in terms of what could actually happen in a tube town on the moon. So welcome, Brian Dunn, and the floor, the air, and the ether is yours.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well.
So the next question is, can you see anything?
You do not seem to be sharing now.
Okay.
There is a green button at the bottom of the screen.
Yep.
Ah, there, something's happening. And we can see your screen. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let me go back one. So, Nicholas, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to speak at the conference. It's an honor. And for the last decade or so, I've been intrigued with the possibility of using lunar lava tubes as a habitat on the moon. And I've been so intrigued that after years and years of research, I wrote and published a hard science fiction novel called Tubetown Frontier, which is available on Amazon. But the book centers around converting a lava tube to a base and what that might look like, what that might be like to live in such a base. So what I'd like to do today is share some of what I've learned about this candidate for a lunar base. So the thing there's one thing in common between Venus, Earth, Moon, and Mars. They all have volcanoes. So after you're through having volcanoes, sometimes they remnant structures left behind. And I'm not a geologist, so I call them lava tubes. So I'm sure most of you know, but when lava comes down from a vent, it eventually begins to cool off at the top and the sides, and a crust forms. And if the hot lava continues to move underneath the crust and drain out, then what we're left with is what we call a lava tube. And I'm not a geologist, so that's what I call them. It can also be referred to as a pipe or a tunnel or a cave, and we have them here on Earth. It could be a single tube, or it could be a network of tubes. And also lava tubes can form below the surface as a subsurface intrusion. So you may not be able to see anything or any visual indication of that from the surface as to what is actually down below you. So it's no great surprise that lunar lava tubes are bigger than those on Earth. On Earth, the lava tubes in Hawaii and Iceland and elsewhere tend to be about 40 meters or so in width. Mars around 400 meters in width. And in this study, Sorrow and Pozzebon looked at collapsed lava tubes that we can see on the surface of the moon and extrapolated that they could be around 900 meters wide. But this information is now outdated. From satellite remote sensing, in the last few years, we've been able to see skylights. And this is the famous Mare Tranquillatus skylight on the left. And with Selene and other instruments, they've been able to try to peek around the corners. And we now realize that, yes, there is the bottom of this particular skylight goes farther on either end So we're actually looking at a hole probably made by an asteroid into an intact lava tube. And we found several of these holes, of course, on the surface. And the other thing you can see from the surface on the right, of course, is collapsed lava tubes. And then you see a whole string of them, and down at the bottom, you see we don't have the collapses. So that is very likely an uncollapsed section of a lava tube. So now, sometimes you can't see anything. This is a view of Rima Maran. It's in Oceanus Procellarum, and it doesn't look like there's much out there. You can't see hardly anything on the surface. However, this is what's under the surface. So this is a projection of the GRAIL mission gravity data. The GRAIL mission mapped the moon for gravity. And so it was looking for mass concentrations. And what you see in red here is not a mass concentration. It's the opposite. It's a mass deficit. So this is a void under the surface. And this scale goes up to 1. You see that red is 1. So this is actually 2 different gravity models that they correlated. They put them together. And where the signatures agree, then that's the red color. So this is 2 different gravity models saying, yes, we both agree on this signature. So the actual cavity could be bigger than this. But how big is it? I call these monsters because this is much more than 900 meters wide. This is 3.5 kilometers wide. And for you Americans, that's 2 miles. It's 550 meters high and 180 kilometers long. So I call this, this is a kilometer class lava tube. This is much more than 90 meters that Soros and Poseidon estimated. So they found this giant cavern, but they also found 10 more. So these are still in what that category of monstrous lava tubes. They have it by length over here, but so you can see here's the Myron one we just looked at. It's 180 kilometers long. Some of them go down to 20 kilometers, but the width is roughly in a range from 1 kilometer, and they may get up. There's another paper that says we may get up to around 5 kilometers in width and still be stable. I think the Myron width is 3.5 kilometers wide. So that's a huge space. If you put something inside of there, it could be a large city. But I'm not advocating that we start with kilometer class lava tubes. One other thing I want to say about the GRAIL gravity data. The GRAIL gravity data was meant to map the gravity of the moon, and that's what it did. But it was not designed to find lava tubes. So it could only find the really large lava tubes. Even the authors of the paper point out that their instrument was not able to find tubes smaller than about 1 kilometer wide and a few hundred meters deep. So therefore, that means they couldn't, they found the huge ones, but this data could not find the mediums and the smalls, if you will. So what do we know so far? We've known about lava tubes and their existence on the moon for a long time. And we've had satellites, and this is in the box at the top here. These are the satellites that have been using cameras and radar and gravimeters to look for them. So what we know so far is that they exist, and they're big, much bigger than what we have on Earth and Mars. We now know that some are really big, And we've also had studies done that we believe they're strong enough to be pressurized. If we want to use one as a habitat, it's got to be able to withstand the pressure from inside when we pressurize it with an atmosphere. And it looks like we can do that. We also think that we can detect and map the majority of the moon's tubes if we use the right type of instrument. And there's a paper that I cite here that promotes using a multi-frequency radar from a satellite to detect and map the majority of the moon's tubes. They think they can get down to about the tubes around 150 meters wide. And we also think that a pressurized lava tube can make an ideal lunar base. Why is that? Well, it keeps us safe from radiation, the four biggies: solar radiation, coronal mass ejections, galactic cosmic rays, micrometeorites on the surface, the temperature shifts. A lava tube would have a constant temperature. And now we know that we could probably pressurize them if it was in good enough shape to pressurize. The other advantage is, of course, with good dust mitigation procedures at the first airlock, you could have the entire work and living area dust-free. And we also believe that converting an existing natural structure has got to be cheaper than the equivalent capacity of a surface habitat. And of course, as other speakers have said today, the more things that can be done in situ, the more things that can be made, the less this would cost. What we don't know, lots of things, but these are just a few of what we don't know. We really still don't know how many there are. We don't know where they are. We have ideas. We have some hints, but as we saw before, you can't always tell from surface and remote observation. They may contain ice or other volatiles. It is thought that most of the tubes are on the near side, but there may be a few on the far side. It's also thought that we don't have tubes at the South Pole, although from some of the planetary geologists I have talked to some about this, and they say we can't rule that out. There's been some evidence of late geologic activity, and it is possible that there could be tubes near the South Pole, not necessarily in it, but we can't rule it out. And we really haven't had an instrument capable of looking with the correct resolution yet. So the other thing we don't know is what we will find, what the condition of the tube is once we do find them. If the ceiling is all cracked and the floor is all full of debris, that would be an issue. But lunar basalt is very hard rock. And if we find intact lava tubes, they have been that way for at least a couple billion years. So they will probably last, 1,000 years more. Another big question is, can we get there? Are they accessible? If they're really far deep under the regolith, or they have a 300-meter roof, it's going to be tough to get inside. So how do we locate, especially the mediums and the small? We think we know where the large caverns are, but how can we find those mediums and smalls? There's been two strategies that have been proposed. And the first one is, of course, to look from a lunar orbiter with ground penetrating radar that could find these cavities. And I want to cite the LaRosse Purdue study that came out in 2016. And then there's a more recent paper that talks about the type of instrument where we might need that could actually find the smaller medium and small size lava tubes. And then the other strategy, of course, is to use rovers on the surface. And I just have a picture here of Astrolab's Flex rover. They recently made a deal with SpaceX to take the rover to the surface within a couple of years here. And I like this concept because these are interoperable rovers. They could pick up an instrument package underneath and roll over the surface with a instrument package of ground penetrating radar and map out a tube. So you can see ESA's done a lot of work. They've been very active over the years in caving and exploring caves and robotic exploration of caves. And I'm citing this ESA demonstration that's been done about exactly how, once we know where a lava tube is, how one or more rovers going over the surface with ground penetrating radar could really map it out to a large degree to fine resolution. So why would we want to do this? Why would we want a large subsurface lunar base? Well, the value of a lunar base is literally the physical space that it could provide. We could have millions of cubic meters of pressurized area under one roof. Now, it depends on what condition the tube is in, but if the roof is all cracked and we're not sure that we can pressurize it, we may be able to spray it with a polymer to seal and then pressurize it once we have the seal. We're certainly going to have to enclose them. And what I propose in my book is that we do it like a submarine, where we segment the lava tube and pressurize each segment. That way also you could kind of build as you go with pressurizing the first segment, making sure it's all good, and then pressurizing the second segment as you go down the tube. But with one roof over your head and being able to work in a short sleeve environment, no spacesuits required, you have so much room to build, and it would be more advantageous to the crew's mental health, of course, not to be camping on the surface, as a previous presenter put it. And it gives us room to grow food and all the things that we need to do to support a large number of people. The other thing I want to point out is, Adam Williams, earlier presenter, talked about being the necessity of recycling. Having all the habitation under one roof would enable us to recycle all the water and food and waste, and really get that virtuous cycle going with a farm and the water and the human waste as well being recycled. If we can have a large enough space to grow our own food and repair and produce the robots and repair things, over time our dependency on Earth's resupply lessens. We may not ever become totally self-sufficient, but the more things that can be done in situ and the more things that can be built on this under the surface lessens our reliance upon Earth's supply. What can we do? This is not an exhaustive list. This is just an illustrative list of the things that we could do with a large subsurface base. But lava tubes are big enough. We have to find a small one or a medium. I think a medium would be the place to start, of course. We would find a small one first, and we'd have to enclose it and test it and see what the capabilities are and how much pressure it can hold. See if our studies have been true. We need the ground truth on all that. But after testing a small tube, I think we would be on the lookout for a medium-sized tube for the first subsurface base. But if we find a medium-sized good candidate, we could create factories, labs, farms, businesses, recreation areas, and even hotels inside something that's big. Okay, and I'm going to steal that tyranny of the stomach. The middle one is basically researching and development food at a large scale. If you have a large number of humans, as Adam said, you're going to have to grow a lot of food. So you need the space to do that. And you need to do it in the lunar soil, like we talked about earlier this morning. But you've got to have the room and the protective environment in order to do that. So if we find such a candidate, what would it cost? It would cost a lot. Any large base is going to be expensive. But just as a comparison, let's make a comparison to the International Space Station. We spend, the ISS can hold at a max 13 people, and we spend $3 billion a year just to keep it operating. I think that with a good candidate lava tube, you could actually support 150 people, and my just pie in the sky estimate is we could probably do that for what we spend for 1 or 2 years of upkeep on the ISS. And of course, with the way that funding works in space, it's always tenuous. So no matter, and I think this is going to be true whether we have a base that's on the surface or below the surface, it's going to be expensive. And my suggestion and what I have in the book is that the cost is spread, similar to how we did the International Space Station. So in my book, I have used my creative license, and the 27 signatories to the Artemis Accords, plus some commercial entities, enter into an agreement similar to what we have at the ISS, that all the signatories fund cost and the supply of the base. In exchange, they get people on the moon. There's a lot of countries that would like to get a person on the moon. And this is basically the way they buy a seat. But once up there, the people and the commercial entities will receive habitation services, which is the shelter and atmosphere and food and water, and also discounted rates for leasing additional space for other enterprises, purchasing propellant or other in situ products. And of course, you can get that payload returned to the Earth. There's going to be a lot of supply missions coming up from the Earth to convert the lava tube. And so when we start producing things, you could have a discounted rate to take things back to Earth as well. The other thing I think too about a lava tube as a base is when you look at the surface camping, I just really am skeptical that you're going to have any tourism in the beginning. It's going to be too dangerous and too small and cramped for the camping on the surface. If you build a big base on the surface, you're still going to have to, have room for tourists. And I think, maybe you could have 5 or 10, depending upon how large the surface base is. And I certainly don't think we'll have tourists until we do have a larger base. But if we have a converted lava tube, you could have 40 or 50 tourists at a time. So large-scale space tourism could definitely offset the conversion price. There are challenges, of course. And, we talked about, earlier speakers talked about public support and international cooperation to build a large base. That's a huge thing. But I think, if this cost and the opportunity is shared, it's much more likely that this could work. Yeah, I also think that if we're going to put people below the surface of the moon, we've got to have lots of redundant systems, of course, for safety, and that requires redundant power sources. So like people have said, I think even with a surface base, you're going to have nuclear, and you'll have solar power, of course, as a backup for your power. I think access is going to be a challenge because we just don't know that much about where the lava tubes are located. The roof is very important. You want a roof that is at least 10 meters deep, if not more, but that also makes it difficult to get inside a lava tube. Unless you find perhaps a lava tube that has been broken, they're still long enough that the unbroken part could be sealed and used as a tube. And if it's close enough to the surface, the ideal, of course, would be to be able to center the regolith outside and be able to drive in all your supplies and equipment and everything else, rather than having to come down an elevator from a pit, like we saw with Tranquillitatis hole, or the Marcus Hills hole. Having to bring all your supplies down from the pit, the surface up above would be difficult and unpleasant. So ideally, you'd want to find access that is close to the surface that could be drive-in access. And in my book, I use the magic of artistic license, and we found a lava tube that's actually just hidden by a slight amount of debris in the wall of an impact crater. So they were able to both utilize the crater as landing pads and then center the regolith into the lava tube, the beginning portion of the lava tube, and keep the first portion unpressurized and used as a motor pool to park vehicles and robots and recharge and repair them, with the benefit of being safe from micrometeorites and a lot of the radiation. So access will be a problem. We need to find a good candidate with good access. The other big challenge is there's currently, to my knowledge, and maybe somebody can correct me, I don't think any of these missions that ESA has been working on and NASA has been working on, currently there's nothing funded to my knowledge. There's been lots of proposals to find and map lava tubes, and there's also been lots of proposals to do robotic exploration of lava tubes and how we can do that. But I think the logical first step is first to locate and map the intact lava tubes. And I think the best way to do that is probably from the satellite, from the lunar satellite. And I think that could be done without impacting the Artemis timetable. And it might even be an eclipse mission if such a thing is proposed. There's no funded mission, and I have the little except China. Just last month, China put out a paper titled Radar Observation of the Lava Tubes on the Moon and Mars. And they stated that they intend to use orbital-based radar and surface GPR to find lunar lava tubes on Chang'e 7. 7 is going to fly, they say, in 2026.
Right, Brian, so we're running low on time, so
I am through.
That's a good timing then. Unfortunately, the there is no time left for questions. There are a couple of questions in chat, so if you could please have a look and maybe answer them, that would
Okay.
be great. But